In the 2011 movie Limitless, Bradley Cooper plays this guy who is down on his luck, has made a lot of poor choices in life, but through a series of circumstances, winds up taking this pill. And this pill gives him, through the magic of just randomly saying things in the plot, this pill gives him the ability to have perfect recall and to instantaneously take in details and analyze things perfectly. So he is able to remember everything he's ever seen, read, heard, whatever, and he's also able to take in new information exponentially faster than anybody else is. Now, this goes on to all sorts of ridiculous things, but it's what I thought about as I was preparing the sermon this week, is this idea of being limitless. Because when you think about your world and you think about your day, how much of your day is shaped by the limits that you face? You have a limited bank account, which causes you to have to get up early and go to work, right? You have limits in what you're allowed to do and where you're allowed to go. You have limits in your time. There are all these things you want to spend your time on, but you can't do them. You have limits in the ability of where you can be. You can only be in one place and not in 37 different places doing 37 different things. And so I think about this idea of being limited and how we are bound by our limits, and that's what makes, to me, that movie, and about the only thing that makes that movie appealing, is this idea, this concept of what would it be like if some of those limits just disappeared and were just gone. But when I think about a life without limits, that's not how I've ever thought about it. And this is not a happy comparison to me. More often, what I think about, and this is way before this movie came out, the 2000-something or 2006-7 movie Click with Adam Sandler in it. Don't watch this movie. It's not good. But in this movie, I'm going to give you this plot point, and this will give you, he winds up in a Bed Bath & Beyond, and he falls asleep, and the angel of death gives him a magic remote control. Now, try and contain yourself from streaming it on Netflix while the sermon's still going on, okay? But this remote control is what I think about, because ever since I was little, when I thought about superpowers, I thought about the ability to stop time. And the ability that right here in the middle of the sermon, and I've forgotten the next point that I need, I can just magically hit a button, and you all are frozen, and I can go and research and do what I need. Or more likely, when I was younger and this question came up on the test, and I remember where it is in the textbook. It's on this page down here in this section, but I can't remember the actual words that it says. I know there was this pretty picture over here, but that's not what she asked on the test. She asked about this section, where I could pause and then come in, catch it, and be good and find out what I needed right there. This idea of being able to stop time, to be able to step out of time, to be able to make it what I needed it to be so that I wasn't hemmed in by the constraints and the problems, the struggles, things that are my fault and aren't my fault, both, but the ability to pause, to rewind, to fast forward if I needed to, all of those kinds of things, that's what I think about with a life without limits. But in reality, and whether we would like to admit it or not, I think limits are probably one of the most essential things that comes in us becoming who we are supposed to be. You all have had experience with kids who were raised with no limits, and you have seen the kind of people that they become. I believe that we grow when we are told no. Now, we don't like it. We don't want it. We aren't interested in it, and we actively seek to do things that won't cause that to happen. But if you want to scratch your head at why the latest pop star or young movie star's life is such a mess, it's because they're told yes at everything at an age when you don't need to be told yes at everything. Because if you think back on when you were younger, the kinds of dumb things you believed and the dumb things that you did, oftentimes the limits are what kept you from making even dumber choices and saying even dumber stuff, right? So when we are told no, when we are hemmed in, those kinds of things can help form and shape us into who we are called to be. Now, why on earth do we talk about this? Why on earth are we bringing this up? Well, we are continuing our series that we are calling The Big Questions. We talked last week as we opened the series about that we are getting this set of 10 questions from a book called Seriously Dangerous Religion. It is an Old Testament professor who wrote this book trying to get people to reread and take seriously again the Old Testament as part of Christian literature. And what he does is use these 10 questions as opportunities to frame and shape what a true theology could look like, what a true sort of framework, not just of God, but of the whole world could look like. Just a systematic kind of theology of all things. So I found it interesting, and I really liked the questions he asked, so we are walking through them. Last week, we started with the question, what is the world? And we framed it like that question. We framed it as that question because if we ask, what is the world, we are forced to navigate and deal with the true nature and reality of it. And last week we struggled and wrestled with the Genesis creation accounts and talked about that in God's frame and God's plan and God's design, the world is good. God's desire and design is for the world to be as it should be. And the world as it should be is good. The world is obviously poisoned and warped by sin. But the world didn't start out that way. That was not God's design. So what is the world? The world is this place that is good, that has been poisoned by sin. God is the one who created this world, we would argue and believe. Which leads us then to today's question. Who is God? And in the next 20 minutes, I'm going to completely answer that question fully in all possible shapes and forms. So buckle up. I'm not really going to do that. I overheard somebody, they weren't even talking to me, but somebody who saw the sermon title today went, oh boy, okay, that's a lot. All right. But if we don't start asking the question, who is God, we're going to do that thing we do. We do it as people. Here's the thing we do. We think we all know what we're talking about, and we think we all understand. We all use the same word, but we all, without checking, use different definitions of that word. And if we don't start by setting definitions so that we all know what we're saying, then we're just talking past each other. See, everyone, everywhere in culture, right? Because for some people, freedom means one thing, and for other people, it means something else. This, in a lot of philosophy circles, this is called Loki's wager. Loki, Thor's brother. The story goes that Loki, there were these, I forget even what they are, but these bad guys had sort of surrounded Loki. And in order to get out of it, Loki had promised that if he let them out, he would give them at the next place that they caught up to him. If they could catch up with him again, they could take his head. They could cut it clean off and take his head. Okay? So they agree, Loki escapes, everything's fine until they catch up with Loki again. And they go, okay, we're going to take your head. And Loki, being Loki, trickster god, says, okay, then I want, what I agreed on is that you could have my head, but not my neck. So at what point does my head end and my neck begin? And they began this long, apparently incredibly long conversation about where is the exact mark where your head ends and your neck begins. And since they couldn't come up with a definition that they all agreed on, Loki was saved for another day. This idea of definitions is important. If we don't stop and at least begin the conversation talking about who is God, then you are just going to let whatever it is that you have defined that is sail on through. And the problem with that is, for most of us, our brains can't comprehend a God that is as good, as big, as holy, as powerful, as different, and as amazing as our God. We default to things we feel more comfortable with. And therefore, we lessen who God is. And when we then walk around with this anemic version of who God is, that's not a God you want to follow. That's not a God you want to give your life for. That's not a God you want to serve, because it's a God you can completely understand and control. And that's not a God worth worshiping. So, who is God? Our scripture today is going to drop us right near the beginning of the story of Moses. Last week we jumped into the very first part of the Bible with Genesis 1 and 2. Now we are skipping ahead to the book of Exodus. Moses, who many of you are at least have a passing familiarity with, Moses, who grew up as the adopted son of Pharaoh after his family protected him from the genocide that was happening of all the Hebrew males being killed. Moses grew up as a son of Pharaoh. Moses sees, as he's an adult, he sees the struggles and the problems with how the Egyptians are oppressing his people. And so we read about how Moses kills an Egyptian. Moses kills an Egyptian, thinks that will get him in good with the Israelites, but both the Israelites and the Egyptians now reject him. So Moses goes out into the desert. Moses finds a family, makes a family, is living out in the desert away from all of that mess, and by all accounts is perfectly happy. And then God shows up. Don't you just hate that? You've got your life all sorted out and worked out exactly like you want it, and then God shows up and starts messing stuff up. So, if you would you turn with me to the book of Exodus, chapter 3. Exodus chapter 3, starting in verse 1. One day, Moses was tending the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian. He led the flock far into the wilderness and came to Sinai, the mountain of God. There, the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a blazing fire from the middle of a bush. Moses stared in amazement. Now, This is the kind of Bible thing that we can just take for granted, but try, if you will, the same way we do with the Christmas story. Oh yeah, Jesus shows up in a barn. That's totally normal. You've heard it so many times you don't realize how unusual this is. They are out in the desert, and the angel of the Lord appears in a blazing fire in the middle of a bush. Moses stared in amazement. Though the bush was engulfed in flames, it didn't burn up. This is amazing, Moses said to himself. Why isn't the bush burning up? I must go see it. When the Lord saw Moses coming to take a closer look, God called to him from the middle of the bush, Moses, Moses. Here I am, Moses replied. Do not come any closer, the Lord warned. Take off your sandals, for you are standing on holy ground. I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. When Moses heard this, he covered his face because he was afraid to look at God. Then the Lord told him, I have certainly seen the oppression of my people in Egypt. I have heard their cries of distress because of their harsh slave drivers. Yes, I am aware of their suffering. So I have come down to rescue them from the power of the Egyptians and lead them out of Egypt into their own fertile and spacious land. It is a land flowing with milk and honey, a land where the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites now live. Don't try that at home. I practiced. Look, the cry of the people of Israel has reached me, and I have seen how harshly the Egyptians abuse them. I would imagine, so far so good, right? When God speaks to you from the middle of a bush out in the middle of the desert, and God says, I have seen your people, I've seen how bad things have happened to them, and I am going to make it right. I'm going to lead them out, and I'm going to give them a land that they've never had before. And none of these things that all seem crazy and outlandish and unbelievable, none of these things are going to be any sort of problem for me. I would imagine Moses, in addition to being sort of awestruck, is also going, yeah, Yeah, you can do that. Yeah, you should do that. That sounds good. Yeah, absolutely. Verse 10. Now go, for I am sending you to Pharaoh. You must lead my people, Israel, out of Egypt. Okay, here's where Moses gets off the bus, right? Because imagine you are being told that you are going to go to the person who you are estranged from, who you ran away from because of the conflicted, complicated history, but also the most powerful man in the world. And you're going to tell him that his free labor force needs to leave and not come back. People back then are like people now, and when you tell the most powerful person in the world that you're about to cut into his bottom line now, it doesn't lead to good things or good places. So, verse 11, Moses protested to God, "Who am I to appear before Pharaoh? Who am I to lead the people of Israel out of Egypt? You may not have heard, God, but the Egyptians and the Israelites both hate me. I've managed to make them both angry at me at the same time somehow." God answered, "I will be with you, and this is your sign that I am the one who has sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God at this very mountain." But Moses protested. No. If I go to the people of Israel and tell them, "The God of your ancestors has sent me," they will ask me, "What is his name?" Then what should I tell them? And God replied to Moses. Now, in my Bible, when God replies to Moses, the next little part is in all small capital letters. I don't know if it's in yours as well. God replied to Moses, "I am who I am." The little note down below also says, "I will be who I will be." Say this to the people of Israel, "I am has sent me to you." God also said to Moses, "Say this to the people of Israel, Yahweh, the God of your ancestors, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob has sent me to you. This is my eternal name, a name to remember for all generations. Now go and call together all the elders of Israel. Tell them, Yahweh, the God of your ancestors, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, has appeared to me. He told me, I've been watching closely, and I see now how the Egyptians are treating you. I've promised to rescue you from your oppression in Egypt. I will lead you to a land flowing with milk and honey, a land where the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites now live. The elders of Israel will accept your message. Then you and the elders must go to the king of Egypt and tell him, the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, has met with us. So please let us take a 3-day journey into the wilderness to offer sacrifices to the Lord our God. But I know that the king of Egypt will not let you go unless a mighty hand forces him. So I will raise my hand and strike the Egyptians, performing all kinds of miracles among them. Then at last he will let you go. And I will cause the Egyptians to look favorably on you. They will give you gifts when you go so that you will not leave empty-handed. Every Israelite woman will ask for articles of silver and gold and fine clothing from her Egyptian neighbors and from the foreign women in their houses. You will dress your sons and daughters with these, stripping the Egyptians of their wealth. Okay, so here's what's going on here. God appears to Moses. God explains what God is going to do, this mighty, powerful thing that God is going to do, upending the most powerful empire in the world through this guy who's living out in the desert as a shepherd. God explains, I'm going to do it in and through you. You are going to be the one. Moses rightly says, question, hang on, why, how, what is this going to be? Well, I'm going to do it. A sign's going to be once you are all going to come back here to Sinai and you're going to worship. Yeah, okay, sure, great. Again, what am I supposed to say? That God just showed up? And God responds and says, tell them I am who I am. Now, Hebrew, the understanding of this I am, lots of scholars believe that this I am who I am is not just present tense and not necessarily just future tense as well. But it's also I was who I was, I am who I am, I will be who I will be. that God, the name of God, is both past, present, and future, with the understanding being that God is not bound by time the same way we are. How we can walk and be influenced by a stream that we are walking through, but we can easily step out of it. In that same way, God can step out of time in ways that our brains barely stretch to understand and make sense of. That God is a God who was, who is, and who is to come, which is the same thing that we hear in the book of Revelation at the very end of the Bible. I am the Alpha and Omega, the one who was, who is, and who is to come. So, the first thing that we need to know, the first thing that Moses learns in this deeper understanding of who God is a thing that we need to know as well, is God is all-powerful and not limited the same way that we are limited. God can step out of time. God can know what is coming, and God can know what has been, and God can be with us right here and now, all at the same time, because God doesn't have to live by the same limits that we have to live by. The God of the past is the God that God presents to Moses. I was the God of Abraham, of Isaac, and of Jacob, the heroes of the patriarchs, the heroes of faith in the book of Genesis, who imperfectly tried to follow what this God had called them to do. This God, I have been there in the past, but even before that, I was there, God says, because we talked last week about God is the God of creation. That unlike a lot of Near Eastern sort of religions and Near Eastern sort of tales of creation, God existed before the world was created. In many tales of Israel's neighbors, as they talked about how God created the world, there are passages where most of the gods are created as part of the creation of the world. If there is one God that was behind and before all of them, it is a distant, unknown God who you can't connect to or see anymore. You get the PR team of all of these current gods who were created by this God over here. Our God does something different. Our God explains that through Genesis that He is the God of creation. He is the God who is present to His people. He was there before all of creation existed, and He then moves from the past into the present of being a God who is present with us now. It's interesting that the first thing that God says to Moses is, take off your shoes, right? You're on holy ground. Now, most Christians I know think about God, when they define God, they put something in capital letters. They either put holy or they put loving. Because there's something in our brain, maybe from the experiences we've had, maybe we're just not big enough to understand it, that when we define God, one of these two is the trump card, okay? One of these two is the focus. And you'll know this because when somebody talks about God with the other one, they'll start saying, when there are people who say, God is love, and God's love pours out to everybody, and God's love, blah, 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 God's love. There will be somebody who'll be like, yeah, but you better make sure you understand God's holy too, and God's not going to let shenanigans happen, and da-da-da-da-da. And you see it the other way too, right? You see somebody talking about God, holy means set apart and different. God wasn't a part of creation. God was set apart and different. That is good news for us because God is able to draw us up through Jesus into His holiness, a holiness we can't escape sort of the stain on our own, but God is not stained by sin. And in Jesus taking on the sin of the world, we somehow are allowed into this sort of holiness of God. So this holiness is a good thing. But when we hear about holiness, there's going to be somebody who goes, whoa. God is also love. God is not just off, distant, being holy, looking at us all sinful people. So here's one of those places where you have to think about both of them in concert and in connection with each other. That God is holy. God is separate and different. You see that here. Take off your sandals. You need to understand, we aren't buddy-buddy. I'm not sitting with you, at a table just drinking milkshakes together. There is a difference and there is a distinction between us. And yet, how can you not read this passage? How can you not read through the rest of the Old Testament into the New Testament and see a God who deeply cares about his people, cares so much that sends his own son to open up a pathway for us to for us to be rebuilt in relationship to God? Holy and love actually work together. So God is the creator God, the one who was before everything was. Now, in how we understand present, we can connect and relate to God both as holy and as loving. But there is also the future, that the God who was and who is still to come. God tells Moses what's going to happen, right? God explains to Moses all the pieces of what's going to happen. And here's the thing. Let's say Moses just decided that he was going to throw himself a temper tantrum and sit down with his sheep and go, no, I'm not going to do it. Do you think God would just throw God's hands up and go, well, I guess all those Israelites are in a lot of trouble because you're not doing what you're supposed to do? God's ways are going to continue. The beautiful thing is God invites us to be a part of it. But if we choose not to, God will still make God's ways happen, just around us. So God is also the God of the future. God is the one who knows what will happen and is working, and as Scripture says, bringing all things together for good for those who love Christ Jesus. So, while we can trust in a God who was the one who created all things, while we can hold on to a God who is both holy and loving at the same time, we can also have faith in a God who is bringing the future together in order to be a blessing for the world and for us. This is why we can take Sabbath. So Sabbath is the one day a week command in the Old Testament. And continued on, this idea of Sabbath is this idea that you can stop and rest. Now, the Pharisees and all of the people who opposed Jesus had allowed all of these fundamental rules to get in the way of Sabbath. That's what Jesus was critiquing. Jesus never said Sabbath is bad. Jesus said when you follow rules instead of following God, you're going to wind up someplace awful. But Sabbath is the opportunity for you to rest. God does not want you to rise and grind 24 hours a day so that you can continue to build your own kingdom and your own brand and your own world. God's desire for you is to rest. God rested in creation, and God's desire for you is to rest as well. And you can rest. Almost fell over. That would have been exciting. You can rest because God's in control. You don't have to be the one in charge of everything. One of the Jewish rabbis talking about Sabbath, one of my favorite quotes is he talked about we can trust that God has the world and we can take a day off. You know why? Because before you were born, God had it, and after you die, God will still be able to have it. So while you're around, you don't have to work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, because God is in control and God has it. We can trust in the God who has us and has the world. We can rest in him. So who is God? God is past and present and future. God is the one who was, who created all things, who brought the good world into existence, who grieved when sin poisoned it. God is the one who brought about Jesus so that we could have a way to reconnect and be drawn back into God's kingdom. When God is with us in the present, both as holy, as one who draws us away from the nastiness and brokenness and sin of the world, but who does it with love, who is constantly reaching out in love and inviting us to be people of love as well. And then God is the one who will bring all things together, not just in our life, but in all things for the rest of time. This is the God we serve. This is the God we worship. For me, this is a God big enough for me to want to worship, because this is a God beyond what I can do. This is a God not stuck in the same problems and struggles and issues that I have. And I don't know about you, but there are days where I feel like that I am barely treading water, and I need someone more powerful, more full, more loving, more gracious, that I can trust with my life, I can trust with my future, I can trust with my relationships, I can trust with everything. I need a God who can redeem and save me, because when I try and do it all on my own, it is a disaster. Maybe you don't know that experience, but let me just tell you. It is a disaster when I try and do it on my own. So who is God? God is the one without limits, who reaches out to us and loves us, who draws us into a better life, who tells us no to save us from the things that will hurt us, and opens up pathways of yes to the things that will be better for us. A God who created the world, who is with us now, and who will be with us forever. This is the one that I want to serve. This is the one that I want to worship. This is who I think of when I answer the question,